everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics, uncorked. This is Virginia Tarani, and Happy New Year, everyone. Hope you had good holidays and are having a great new year. It is 2025, and we are starting this year off strong, and boy, do we have some legal topics. I never thought we would be talking about the possible acquisition of Greenland and the Panama Canal, the possible renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, the January 6th issues with regard to certification and how that's gone this year with regard to Trump certification, and a couple books along the way. So if those topics interest you, please stay tuned with us through this session. Hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to do that so you can follow us along through the year and so that others can find us too. I am Virginia Tarani. I am the host of The Law Unscripted, which is hosting the Legal Weekly Wine. So that's who we are. I'm also the attorney and owner of Tarani Law, LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. We're based in Maryland, and we do Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, mostly personal injury work. And I am joined in both of these companies by the esteemed Chelsea Rogers. Good to see you today.
Glad to be here. We got a lot to talk about.
As always. Yeah, and Happy New Year. Good to see you again.
2025.
I know. We rarely all see each other, even though we all work for each other. Anyway, good to see you and your lovely face. And the other lovely face we have is my father. This is Dr. John Vial. He is the Dean of the Honors College of Middle Tennessee State University, and he is an expert in the Constitution, the amending process, constitutional law, and you hate to use the word and political science, but you've got extensive education in political science. You've taught political science, and I'm thrilled that you're going to be here with this conversation. As always, good to see you. Happy New Year.
And to you.
All right, so the Legal Weekly Wine, where the H in wine is optional. So we're going to do the wine without the H. And I have gone back to one of my favorites for the start of the year. I was trying to do a holiday one because somehow we missed that. And I couldn't find it. And I gave up and I went back to my own. And this is, you guys, if there are any comments of go to another wine shop, whatever. Okay, look. Time has not been on my side, so we'll find some later. But what I did grab is one of my favorites, which is Bartonura. It's a product of Italy, and it's Moscato d'Asti. It's a 2019. Beautiful flavor, beautiful color. It's very fruity, very sweet, which is what I prefer. So that's what I'm starting out with. Chelsea, what wine do you have?
To everyone's utter amazement and shock, I'm back at it with the Franzia boxed wine. No one saw this coming.
I tell you, if they want to sponsor us.
I'm telling you, I am the biggest fan of boxed wine. Honestly.
I actually like the taste. And, truly, if they want to sponsor us, hit us up, let us know. We'll be drinking your boxed wine. It actually is quite tasty. Dr. Vial.
Yeah, I want some Franzia merch. Come on, bring it on.
We're back to water. I already had my Pepsi earlier today,
okay.
So I can only do one.
Okay.
And public service.
Yes.
The news on alcohol is not as good as it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. They are now claiming that even for some people, one a day is too much.
That's true.
Particularly for women. It's, and I don't know if that's because of size or there's a genetic I'm just not sure. But, some caution to listeners that it apparently is more of a carcinogenic than people had realized before.
Right.
So
certainly.
Cheers with water.
Cheers with your water.
For some reason, I think, my Halloween glass here. I'm not sure why.
Okay, I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah,
pumpkins and ghosts and all kinds of nice things.
I tell you what, we're going to send you some of our merch. We've got a coffee tumbler. Not that you have to drink coffee, but use it for your water. Coffee tumbler with our colors that says, allegedly, this is coffee. So we'll send you one. I'll get that to you, and you can drink your water there. For it here. But I got some cover by warning people against the perils of alcohol. That's right. Well, cheers and Happy New Year, everybody. And here we go with our podcast for today. Okay, so before we start with most of it, we do want to say, I want to give a moment to President Jimmy Carter. So former President Carter, as I understand it, is the oldest president or living former president that we've had. Is that right, Dr. Weil?
It is, and it partly comes from being married to the same woman for 77 years. So if you can do one, that if you can stay married for 77 years, you might live to be 100.
You might. And what a precious couple they were. And she just died within the last 2 years.
That's right.
And he's lived to 100, died just before the end of 2024.
Yeah.
Dr. Weil, I believe, I hate to make assumptions even though I know, but I don't want to make them on air. So apologies that I'm calling you out that you lived in the Carter administration. Is that right?
I did. I actually voted for Carter, and it'll probably tell I actually voted for him twice. So
wow.
I voted against a far more popular president than he.
Oh, my goodness. But you were only voting Republican back then.
No, I have always sort of switched Republican and Democrat.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
And he was, and we'll talk, maybe when we get to the books, we'll talk about this. The year he was elected was proclaimed the year of the evangelical, because more than most other people, he identified as an evangelical Christian, which is basically a Protestant, Bible believing, we might say, born again.
Yeah.
All different kinds of terms are used, but I'm particularly interested in him because I'm working on a book on presidents who identify. And what's interesting, it's similar to his relationship with fellow presidents. Even though he identifies strongly as an evangelical, he did not identify as much with Billy Graham as many others did, who was sort of the prominent evangelical of his time.
And one of the advisors
there's a beautiful picture. Now, today they were all together at the funeral, all the ex-presidents, but there's this famous picture of him with all the ex-presidents, and he's a little off to the side. That he would rather associate with the people that he was making habitat houses for than he would with, apparently, the next presidents.
And his work, especially after his presidency, is really more famous than his presidency. And
it is. Although one of his advisors at the funeral today made a point. He actually had a fairly consequential presidency. His negotiations between Begin and Sadat, Israel and Egypt, were among the most impressive diplomatic achievements of the last century or so. I mean, he got two nations that had long been at war. I mean, all the way back to biblical times, if you will recall.
Right.
Got them together and kept them together and worked out something that has lasted, 45 years now. He, of course, was the one who negotiated the Panama Canal Treaty, which we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Exactly.
He was the one who mandated seatbelts, for better or worse. He was one of the first presidents, I guess you could say Theodore Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt was, but he was the first president. Of course, the energy crisis occurred during his administration, but he was the one, urging us to conserve and urging, that we need to find alternate sources of energy and the like. So I think he was more consequential than he's given credit for. He lived at a time of high inflation, and of course, the last 100 and some days, the Iranians had captured Americans and held them hostages, and that would be a hard row for anybody to hoe and get reelected under.
Yeah. Well, his work since then has been incredible, and the Christian ministry that they had within their church, teaching Sunday school almost to, within the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And doing, like you said, the Habitat for Humanity. Even a couple of years ago when he had fallen and had bruises all over his face, there were pictures of him out there, doing nails into boards to do houses.
I think I told you this story, but one of the sweetest stories I heard about Carter was we do forget when we portray him as too much of a saint. We forget that he was very ambitious.
Right.
He had some sharp elbows when it was needed to get ahead. And he was telling the story about how, particularly when he was young, if he got on an elevator and he wanted to get to the top floor, he got really aggravated at anybody in the way.
Yeah.
And over time, he began to think, well, no, they each have their own destinations. They're each individuals, and tried to get to know them. And apparently, when he would board a plane, he would go down and shake hands with everybody, knowing that,
wow.
most people would want to shake hands with the former president. So he had that personal touch. In some ways, it worked against him.
He was seen as too soft.
Well, he was seen as too soft, and you can abuse the prerogatives of the presidency, but sometimes they're useful. Things like people standing as they sing "Hail to the Chief." He didn't like that, but people wanted to know that there was somebody there in charge.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you have to do symbolic things. When we have graduations here, I sit on the stage. It's not because of me, it's because I'm a dean. That's what deans do.
Right.
And it seems sort of petty, but apparently it's somewhat meaningful to students to see that their deans of their colleges are up there. And Carter, I think, and the person who followed him knew it better than anybody, Ronald Reagan. He knew how to put on a show, and he knew, that you stand by the Statue of Liberty and under 14 flags and beside, other world leaders in a way that Carter didn't perhaps quite grasp.
And it's interesting. There's almost a comparison to me of the character of Biden, who's been the president for the last 4 years and not getting elected for a second term, to a stronger character of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So
again, I think age has a lot to do. We've discussed this before.
1,000%. Yeah.
I think, Biden. I wish he hadn't said this week that he thought if he had continued running, he would have won.
He would have
lost
worse.
But
no prophet,
I get
but
if he were running again at 4 or 8 years younger, I think he might have been able to win.
Yeah.
I don't blame him for getting older. But I do think, I think he carried on a little too, I think he should have given up the renomination bid, and it maybe if there had been a stronger contest there, we would have had a little different outcome, but who knows?
All right. So since we've just talked about Carter and his negotiation about the Panama Canal, let's move into the Panama Canal. And let me as a forefront to this.
Are you paying for the tickets or am I?
I'm going to give that to you.
Okay.
For this, a lot of people.
Warmer down there this time of year.
It's got to be. Oh my gosh, I'm freezing to death up here. We're in Maryland. I'm in Maryland, and we have had quite the snow and ice storm this last week. My kid went back to school for the first time on Thursday, missing all of Monday through Wednesday and getting a 2-hour delay on Thursday. So, anyway.
I bet he didn't enjoy it as much as his teachers did.
Right?
I know. Having been married to a school teacher, they love snow days.
Yes, they do. And I did not love the snow days, but it's funny because I work a lot from home, and even without it, I'm an attorney, and my kid was asking, well, why can't we just play? Can you do something with me? You want to watch a show? And it's like, I am still working. And he's like, but it's a snow day. And it's like, I'm still at my desk and on the phone. The phone still works, buddy. My computer's working. I don't have to go in. But anyways, in any case, so we're going on to the Panama Canal. And what I'm calling this is the possible acquisition of other territories.
The reacquisition in this case.
Yes, for Panama Canal. For Greenland, no, it's separate. But what I want to do is comment that, yes, it's a political issue, but ultimately it's a question of the law and a question of the Constitution. What is legal? What is allowed? What does our Constitution say, which is our basic law and foundation? What powers do people have? Which way would it go? Yes, we will be getting into the political applications of it as well, but I wanted to make sure people knew why, as a legal show, we're getting into this specific aspect, which seems so political and has a lot of political ramifications. I don't want to get this wrong. So everybody chip in. I've done the best that I can to research it because I was not alive when the Panama Canal was created, nor was Dr. Vile. Not on this one. And Chelsea certainly wasn't. She's hardly alive, when I turned 40, but whatever. Our young one in the group. So with the Panama Canal, as I understand it, for those who need some background, and I'll try to be brief, is the best way essentially that people could get originally from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean was to use their ships all the way around the tip of South America at the bottom, that there was no way to go through.
Or now some took a land route.
Right.
They would land on one side like a Panama and then do a land routing and do another ship there on the other side.
Right. But it's a huge hassle and a lot of extra days,
well, it's
a lot
very
of
treacherous.
extra expense. Yes.
The Horn of South America is one of the most treacherous navigable waters that there are, is my understanding.
So there was an agreement ultimately after a lot of back and forth between, among Colombia, France, and the United States, and then ultimately Panama, which declared its own independence, which the United States supported. Dr. Vile,
facilitated, yes.
Facilitated, supported, whichever. And ultimately, Panama itself was created with the U.S.'s support. And ultimately, a deal was worked out between Panama and the United States for the United States to buy up France's equipment and to build a passageway, a land passageway where they would dig out and create a canal where the boats could go, the ships and boats could go from the Atlantic Ocean into the Pacific Ocean through this little narrow gap between essentially right above South America. Is that correct in geography?
Well, it's in Central America, yes.
Right, so Central.
Yeah.
I'm going to admit geography was not. Okay,
America.
So close enough. And from my understanding, we had a lot of issues. So this was with Theodore Roosevelt. This is in the early 1900s.
Yes.
And not the overall 1900s. Pause and segue. My son was not born until after 2000. Okay. So he was born after that. And every time he refers to my birthday now, he was like, yeah, you were born in the 1900s. Technically, that is correct. That is absolutely correct. But when I say the 1900s, I keep thinking of, 1900 to 1910, 1920.
Oh, well, it's actually 1900 to 2000, but
but that's the thing is, yes, it's the entire century, and that's how he's referring to it. But when I say it, I'm used to saying it as far as a very specific historical time from my history books, where we referred to the 1900s or the early 1900s as 1900 to 1910 area. So it's very disconcerting, and I feel very, very old. But in the early 1900s, being 1903, 1910 area, we're looking at Theodore Roosevelt, who is actually working on a treaty and an annual payment. And what we ultimately had is we had a big kerfuffle with Colombia, who was trying to take over or to do the canal. There were issues where there was seen as possibilities of war against Colombia because of our position with Panama. But ultimately, in 1904, the United States actually purchased the French equipment and excavations for a lot of money, especially at that time. And then Colombia and the United States entered into the Thompson-Urrutia Treaty, I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, where we agreed to pay Colombia a lot more money, to grant and to grant them special privileges in the canal zone. And in return, Colombia then recognized, this is 1921, they then recognized Panama as an independent nation. So that's where we stand. But then we we took over the canal in 1904 to do the construction. But as Dr. Vile is saying, in 1974, There were negotiations with settlement for the full independence and taking of the canal by Panama with Jimmy Carter.
Right. We ran the canal from the 1910s on through that time. We were in sole possession. And then my understanding is that the agreement that Carter reached, and Ford, I think actually, well, Ford and Carter both, but the agreement that we reached was that by, I believe it was 2000, or is it by, by
December
2000,
31st,
we would turn over
1999.
full control to Panama, with the understanding that Panama would have to, I don't know if they have to give us special rates or they can't discriminate against our shipping.
Right.
And part of what I think has happened now, particularly in the last couple of years, climate change, you know, when we think of a canal, we just think of you think of a single, you
Almost one
draw
little
a furrow
river,
in the
yeah.
ground and you make it big enough for ships to come through. This is much more complicated. It's a lock system where they have to draw in water from freshwater lakes to raise and lower the ships as they go across. And my understanding is in recent years, the freshwater supplies have not been as bountiful. And so it has become more expensive. It takes thousands and thousands of gallons for every ship that passes through. And so it's become more expensive to operate. And Trump, as a businessman, I suppose, is partly concerned. And then added to this is China is expanding its influence in South America and Africa and elsewhere, and apparently has bases or some kind of facilities near the canal. They don't operate it, they don't control it. But I think his fear is that if they were to take over, Panama might not be able to,
defend it or control it or
in a way that
possession.
we would be able to. Yes.
Right. So so technically, you're absolutely right on, effective at noon on December 31st, 1999, the Panama Canal Authority assumed command of the waterway, and it remains the chief source of revenue now for Panama. And that was started with the treaty by Jimmy Carter, where Panama retains free control of the canal so long as they agreed to the treaty guaranteeing the permanent neutrality of the canal.
Right.
So not the permanent use by someone else or the permanent control by someone else, but simply the continuing neutrality of the canal itself.
And part of the impetus for this is, anytime you have a foreign entity within your own country, there's bound to be friction. We have this on, American bases, in Japan, where there's constantly, conflict between the civilians and the military. And this is what's, this was at a time of rising nationalism in South America, and people, that we think they thought we stole it, but we thought it was fair and square, and they didn't quite see it that way. And so the military was telling Carter that in terms of stability, unless we were willing to fight and kill people that wanted that canal back, we were likely to just be a source of constant tension with the South American and Central American countries. So he actually did it in response to a strategic concern. But, there were some, I had friends at the time who said, we stole it fair and square. It's ours. We have no more reason to give it up than we would to give Texas or, California.
Right. So that's the position of the Panama Canal. And Dr. Vial, as you were saying right now, at the new year of 2025, Donald Trump, before even his inauguration, has said that he has extreme interest in obtaining the Panama Canal back under either U.S. control or possession. I'm not sure exactly which one he's looking for, or both. I do agree, Dr. Vial, that with the assessment that a lot of it is probably motivated by security for the United States, which certainly is, as commander-in-chief, he absolutely has the right to do to protect and defend our country. We're going to stop there for a second, though, and then talk about the background of Greenland. And then what we're going to do is combine them together to discuss the actual legal issues surrounding the taking or the controlling of either or both of these territories.
We're just going to assume we're going to get Canada, right, without a fight?
Yeah, they're
and
just
some
going to be, they're just
Mexico.
going to join us of their own, volition. That's not going to be a fight.
Yeah, just opt in.
51st state. Where do we go when we elect somebody that we don't want to be under if Canada becomes part of the U.S.?
That's what I'm saying. Where do we
Really
escape
worried
to?
about this.
I can't escape anywhere. Right. Yeah. No. So yeah, we're going to technically leave Canada off the table. However, many of our comments will also include issues of trying to take Canada or obtain Canada or adopt it or whatever we want to do with it.
And let's just say at the beginning, some of this is probably real estate threats.
Sure.
We're maybe it's possible that he's most interested in lowering the rates of our ship in Panama or getting a better trade deal with Canada or who knows with Greenland.
Of course. And these are all positive things, right? We want to save money. We want to reduce debt. We want to, obtain better contracts. We want to obtain security. So all of these types of interests, I believe, are good interests and agree with. But the question is, are they legal? What can we do with this legality? What will it lead to? So with Greenland, we have not had any prior interest with Greenland except as a military base. And we still have one there.
So we've had presidents, at least, I believe, from Andrew Johnson through Harry Truman, who have considered trying to purchase Greenland from Denmark. I believe that's right. So
that sounds
Trump is
right.
not the first. I don't know that any of them made it that big a priority. But, Greenland looks a little more enticing. It's a little more strategic.
Yes.
As ice melts in the Arctic.
Yes.
And there's a bigger scramble for the Arctic and for control of that waterway there.
As
and
well
also,
as security.
As ice melts, it's the minerals, uranium and whatever, might become more accessible than they otherwise would be. Right. Which is also, of course, a good reason that Denmark wouldn't want to sell it.
Absolutely. And what it's technically a territory. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark, of the Kingdom of Denmark. So Denmark is its own country. Greenland is not technically a country. It is a territory that they have citizenship in Denmark. So they're technically Danish. They are citizens of Denmark. They are because they're part of Denmark, they are part of the European Union. And the European Union actually recognizes them as one of the territories of the Union. So that's what we have. And in addition to that, so we had a lot of issues in World War II, where when Denmark was occupied by Germany and the Third Reich, there were severances with Greenland at that time. We came in at some point to use the bases and to help with that transition, which I think, and don't quote me on this, is a lot of the subsequent use of how our bases came into more full force and we have more access to and use of the base on Greenland. So it's not like we have no connection with Greenland at all, but it is a more limited connection. It's been pretty isolated since 1940, and they've been, subject to Denmark.
There's about 58,000 people who live there.
That sounds right. It was made an equal part of the Danish government or Danish kingdom, but home rule was granted in 1979.
Right.
So it's a very complicated situation of how this is.
It's complicated, but we have no legal claim to it. I mean, nor did we to Alaska. I mean, we purchased Alaska, and Russia agreed, and we did it. And I don't think there's anybody who think there was anything wrong, other than the native Inuits might wonder why they didn't have much of a choice in it. But we don't have any legal. I mean, we have a legal claim if we have a leash to use a base there, and we are fellow members of NATO as long as we remain, which Trump seems to be concerned that maybe we shouldn't. but we don't have any legal claim at all to taking somebody's territory by force.
It would be, and let me ask on this, because I'm not as familiar with this as I should be. Puerto Rico is one of our territories.
That's right. Puerto Rico, Guam.
It would
actually, we would have, and don't misquote me, the Viles advocating we take over the Philippines.
Oh, no, God, no.
we had a greater claim to the Philippines that was actually given to, or we purchased from Spain after the Spanish-American War than we do to Greenland.
Right.
And it might be be a better place to vacation than who wants to go to Greenland, right?
Yeah. And
nothing
sounds
against.
really cold.
Yeah.
And I'm cold enough here in Maryland.
And of course, you know why they call it Greenland, right?
Yes, I do. But please say.
Well, because they came from Iceland, and who wants to go to Iceland? So they find another barren place, and we're not going to make the same mistake twice. We're going to call it Greenland.
So more people come and occupy it thinking it is actually
you think of Ireland,
green.
you think of Greenland, right? Yeah. Good marketing technique. Donald Trump would have loved it.
Absolutely. Let's rename it. So there's the other naming issue that we're going to put on the table and then continue with the conversation. Is there's also, amidst all of this, there is the suggestion, the very strong suggestion, that we're going to try to rename the Gulf of Mexico, which for geography purposes is basically in the combination of, it's in the Caribbean where, there's Florida, there's Louisiana, there's Texas, there's this little loop, and it joins with the Caribbean and part of Mexico. So the idea has been suggested that it be renamed the Gulf of America. So there's that on the table.
Okay, and let me add something there. That technically, that is not as chauvinist as it sounds.
It does touch our territories.
What's chauvinist is when we refer to the United States as America. We're only part of the Americas.
We're North America.
Canada's part of North America, Central America, South America. So if it were proposed as this is we're doing it for our common, but when Americans hear Gulf of America, they think Gulf of the United States.
Right. Not the continent.
Yes.
Yeah.
USA. Right? Like that's sort of the vibe, honestly.
Yes.
It is. So now we're looking, what I want to do is let's go back to our original law. Let's start taking the legal aspect. And Dr. Vile, you've started with some of this, but I really want to break down what our actual powers are of the president and Congress and figure out what we're dealing with here. So we start with Congress, which is the first article of the Constitution, because the idea was that was the most important body. Equal branches, but the most powerful, the one that had the most authority. And there is, there's an entire section 5 on powers and duties of Congress. There's the necessary and proper clause. Exactly. Section 8 is powers. Well, Section 5 is both powers and duties, and Section 8 is powers of Congress. So we've got those. And then the president comes next under Article 2. So that was Article 1, which we're going to discuss. Article 2 is the president's powers. And what I understand, and Dr. Vile, you're our expert here, but let's discuss this. I understand from Congress, Article 2, Section 8, Congress has the power, among other things. Right, Article 1, I apologize. Article 1, Section 8, we've got, the power of the purse, right? The bank, the post office, coining money, tribunals, setting up courts inferior to the Supreme Court, punishing piracies and felonies, a lot of fun things in here. Now, we've got a couple of things that I want to mention here. We have the power to raise and support armies. We have the power to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections and repel invasions, provide for organizing, arming, disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. And let's see. And here's the necessary and proper clause. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So that's what we have.
Isn't there also a power, I need to look it up here, but doesn't Congress have the power to govern the territories?
I believe so. Let me make sure I see this in the right section.
And that's what I would think would be in Article 1. Yes, section, well, no, maybe it's Article 4, it looks like.
Oh, right. Yes.
Article
I had to
4,
skip down to that
Section 3.
too. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
So go ahead and read out what that one says.
Well, Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Interestingly, I don't think the Constitution actually deals specifically with acquiring new territories. And, this
but
became a problem.
It does.
Pardon?
So let's go back to Section 3 and mention this and let you continue. So right above the one you just talked about, It says in Article 4, Section 3, new states.
Admission of new states.
Right. This is that at least acquiring property. New states may be admitted by Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, etc., without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as Congress. Okay. So, and then there's the shall have power to dispose of and make rules and regulations respecting the territory belonging to the United States.
Right. But what I was trying to say, I think I'm right, that it doesn't actually explicitly say how you acquire new territory.
Correct.
Precedent continental was basically we follow the European model, which is occupation and declaring property makes the territory yours, whereas
Right.
Native Americans didn't have that same conception of property rights. But when it came to others, basically we've acquired territories through either force or through treaties.
Correct.
And for a treaty, the president typically negotiates a treaty.
Yes.
The Senate has to approve a treaty by 2/3 vote.
Exactly. So that's where we go into Article 2, Section 2, which defines the powers of the president. And it's he shall have power, and it says he, I'm not trying to do gender issues, but he shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and nominate advice and consent ambassadors, ministers, consuls, etc. So yes, that's his power. And ultimately under Section 2, President shall be Commander in Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service. So there's the issue of Congress is raising the Army, but the president is the commander in chief of the
powers are divided.
Exactly. The powers are divided. Dr. Weil, based on your reading and your understanding of the Constitutional Convention, what are these separate powers for raising the military and commanding the military?
Well, I mean, there's no clear, it's not always clear, but generally the president as commander in chief, he clearly has the power to repel any act of aggression against the United States, any invasion. War Powers Act of 1973 basically says he has 60 or 90 days that he can employ forces without congressional consent. Not everybody thinks that law was constitutional, but
right.
So usually you get some kind of compromise between them. I think what's fascinating about this debate, and I may be wrong on this, but I don't remember. Well, I do remember in Trump's first term, he sort of did a trial balloon on Greenland, and most of us were like, "What? Greenland?
Right, where's this coming from?"
Yeah, where did that come from? But I don't remember in either campaign, any of these issues getting any prominence. And it's almost
during
such
this
that I
campaign.
wonder if it's not a diversionary tactic. If he'd rather talk about something that's not going to ever happen than he would about how he's going to solve the Ukrainian war in a day, or how he's going to get inflation down, or how he's going to stop wildfires in California, and raindrops and rainbows and puppy dogs and all of that.
Right. But it's interesting. I like the point that you have, because it wasn't a campaign issue. He didn't run on it. It wasn't, quote unquote, approved by the citizens of America, because that wasn't what he ran on as a ticket. The, immigration, deportation, that was part of his ticket, which he could claim he was given the majority approval for, but not these issues. And one of the things that I want to bring up is there's at least one article saying that Trump is warning that Denmark could face steep tariffs if it doesn't give up Greenland, and he refused to rule out taking military action and taking Greenland by force.
And the problem with this, I mean, there's a lot of problems with it. One is just because, it's like I look at my neighbor's house and it's better than mine and say, well, I'd really like to have that. I mean, just in a pure, but the other problem is, we take Greenland, we might as well just give up on Taiwan because it's China. We might as well give up on Ukraine because it's next door to Russia.
And it was previously Soviet Union territory, or combined.
Particularly in international law, you want to behave in a way that you would be comfortable if other nations around you behaved in the same way. And we are really opening the door. The beauty, and he was sanctimonious at times, and sometimes he didn't always maybe weigh other factors. But the beauty of Jimmy Carter is he said, we're for human rights.
Right.
We're going to stand for it all the way around the world, and we're going to try to do it as consistently as we can. And this has nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with anybody's human rights.
Right.
They have something that we want.
Yeah.
That is not, one of the best parts of the Thucydides, Peloponnesian Wars, is what's called the Melian Dialogue, where the Greeks want to take over this island and get tribute, and they say, we don't want it. And the Greeks say, it's too bad, we have the power to do whatever we want to do, and they go and slaughter everybody.
Right.
We have the power to do that, probably, as the United States, but what are the long-term implications of it?
And he's made the same claims for
Mexico
Panama.
has a greater claim
to
Texas than we have to Greenland.
Are they going to come in and take it? We wouldn't let Texas just go to Mexico. We would defend it. So what are we expecting?
It's like the beginning of World War III. This feels like how this happens.
Right, but why are we starting it? And that's the concern is, Panama's like, that's our territory. Dr. Vile, I think your comment was where I was headed is, well, what about Taiwan? China's already making moves to repossess Taiwan. So what is this opening up? Russia is saying, we had Ukraine. It was part of the Soviet Union. It's our territory. We want it back. We look at Crimea. We look, Germany. Right, let's go all the way back to Germany. We had
Lorraine.
Exactly. We had that territory. We want it back. So how far down this rabbit hole are we gonna go? And it
might all be window dressing.
It could be.
It may be. The joke may be on us, but we don't know.
Right, but why are we?
Yeah.
We have to take it seriously if it's something our future president is saying, our president-elect is saying. So why should we disregard it as a joke? What's a joke and what's not? What's a play and what's not? And, the European Union is taking it seriously. It's, France and Germany are already saying, look, the borders of the country are set. Don't mess with the borders. There's the question of whether other countries that have been our allies will be forced to look at this as an invasion of one of their European Union territories, and whether they will then have a response to having to defend them against us.
In fairness, now I could be wrong about this, but I did listen to the press conference, and it was painful. But the question that was worded was whether the president would rule out economic sanctions or military force, and he said no. So you could interpret that, but the tariffs would be, I mean, that would be ridiculous to exert a tariff in order to try to get somebody to give up territory to you.
Right.
That would just be
I mean,
nonsense on stilts, as Jeremy Bentham would say.
right.
I wonder if it would be effective, though. Like, does it work? Does it play out that way?
Well, that's what he's been trying to do with Canada, right? And how effective has that been? Well, Trudeau's resigned. He made movement.
Trudeau was in trouble before. I wouldn't give Trump necessary credit for that or blame. But I don't think anybody takes that seriously other than as a negotiating tool for tariffs.
Right.
But if you remember, Trump fixed all this in his first term, remember? We did away with NAFTA, and we put his big, beautiful plan that he had for Mexico and Canada. And I thought all these problems were taken care of, so I'm not quite sure how they've reemerged.
Right. Well, so let me ask this. Let's go back to these powers and the law, the ultimate basic law that we start with, which many of these other European countries don't have. England has no constitution.
Well, they don't have a written constitution.
Correct. So we have one. This is our law. Dr. Weil, let me ask you this. And we're going to get into Vietnam and Korea. As I understand it, Congress, according to the Constitution, has the power to declare war.
They do.
Not the president.
Yes.
So when we're looking at the current conceivable actions against Greenland, which is technically against Denmark, against Panama, when we look at these, is there what got us into Vietnam without the actual declaration of war by Congress? What happened with Korea? And can this be used again? Or is it a different situation?
Well, Korea was justified under the United Nations as a police action. I think if Truman had gone to Congress after North Korea invaded South Korea, that Congress might very well have given approval. But he didn't want to take that chance, and so he justified it as a police action. Vietnam's a little bit more complicated. We had troops there for, this was part of the Cold War, opposition to communism. Lyndon Johnson in 1964 did get an adoption of what was known as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It appears as though he created a situation where it looked like North Vietnam had attacked American ships, and this was used as a justification. But, anytime a president goes too far ahead of Congress, you're going to get in trouble over the long term. We didn't have a formal declaration of war, to my knowledge, against Afghanistan.
Right.
We did get, when we invaded Iraq.
The first time
We did get a declaration, not a declaration of war, but sort of authorization of force. I really think most of this is negotiating business. I think it's poor. I think it makes us look like bullies. And particularly, it's one thing to try to bully China or Russia. It's another to bully a NATO ally.
Our allies. Right. What credibility do we have? What credibility are we giving ourselves if we're attacked and we call for help? It's like, well, you've been trying to take our territories. Go, good luck.
Right.
And what would we
actually,
do if...
I think I'm right on this. The only time NATO, the famous provision in NATO that we come to the aid of all was actually after the attacks of 9/11.
Right.
Europe came to our defense. We've not
Right.
yet had to come. And I mean, we in some ways we've come to Ukraine's defense, but they're not formally a part of NATO.
Right. And it's been more in supplies, like
Right.
we did originally in World War II, where we were sending supplies to
Right.
Britain and armaments.
Right.
But what credibility do we have for trying to defend Ukraine? or defend the autonomy of Taiwan, like you're saying, going back to that is we don't look like we're, what kind of powers are we doing and what kind of play are we doing to obtain other countries and other territories?
No, it doesn't make us look good.
I don't think so either. I think politically it sets us up very terribly. But
let me add one other thing, since you mentioned the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
When the Louisiana Purchase was negotiated, Mr. Jefferson was very concerned because he believed in strict construction of the Constitution, and he didn't find a provision saying that we could take new territory, although we had been doing it from the Native Americans. He wanted to put through a constitutional amendment, but partly because they were afraid that Napoleon would change his mind and that we'd lose the opportunity, his advisors said, everybody's for this, don't worry about it, let's just go ahead with it. But the result is we still don't have a clear provision that I know of for purchasing or acquiring new territories.
Right.
And again, the first foreign territories, the first non-contiguous territories that we got, well, we purchased Alaska. That was not quite non-contiguous, but it was basically the Spanish-American War, where we got Cuba, Philippines, Guam, some assorted territories there. Again, we have a greater claim to Philippines, and I'm not advocating that we,
of course not,
that we exercise.
Of course not.
And the great irony in the Philippines, as you probably know, William McKinley was president, and one of the justifications, when we took over, when we got the Philippines from Spain, the Filipinos were still they had their own independence movement, and we went in and quashed it. And McKinley's justification, and he was another, by the way, evangelical president, his justification was that we needed to take it over and Christianize it.
Oh,
well, this was a little insulting to the people of Philippines, most of whom were Roman Catholics.
Oh, goodness, right.
But they still haven't been Christianized.
Protestantized, right.
In the way that McKinley thought maybe they should be.
Goodness.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So if President Trump, as commander-in-chief, said to our military, go invade Greenland, what is the choice? What are the actions? What legal remedies, if any, does Congress have? Do the citizens have?
Well,
can it be stopped?
They have the power of appropriation.
Which
so
means
it would
what?
be difficult, but they could say
laughing.
We're not going to fund.
Okay.
We're not going to fund this military activity. Now, it might be too late, if you've already bombed it into nothingness, but that's probably the most effective. I don't think impeachment works very well against Trump.
It didn't last
time. Could you
time.
consider it a high crime and misdemeanor to invade a country that hasn't done anything to you?
It's not technically a felony or a high crime that's listed in the code, is it? I mean, Chelsea, do you know of any code?
Well,
No,
again, high crime, that term is
vague.
It's very ambiguous. But
if there's not actual sort of agreed upon procedure of how we acquire new property, territory, can it really be a violation then? Because it doesn't feel like it.
Well, what about the Hague Convention? And what about the International Court? I mean, could he be pulled up?
They can say, I think that when it comes down to that, they can say whatever they want, but this is going to sound terrible. We're the United States. What are they going to do about it?
They've made their decision. Now let them enforce it.
Yeah, exactly. What are they going to do about it? Nothing.
But, he could be technically considered a wartime criminal or something to that effect. I don't know. The options are weird.
I really think, I think we're talking about something almost in fantasy land. Although I said that before about Trump. So
I know, but that's the thing. And what I don't understand, and this is, politically based, but honestly, if he is saying it, what are we supposed to do with it? If someone says something, do we just disregard everything that they say? Because, I mean, at this point, I'm waiting on pins and needles is what's the truth and what's not. What is a power play? And I understand that politics is a full power play. I understand that there are forces that I don't understand and don't know about. I get that there are security measures that I don't know about. The president has confidences that he knows that we do not have. I understand that. But, I almost thought, for good or for ill, my first thought when I heard about Greenland was, has he been watching The Diplomat? Chelsea, you're laughing.
I'm dying. That's
I
so
haven't
funny.
seen that one, so I can't comment intelligently on it.
Second season, I don't want to give too much away because for those of you like
No
Dr.
spoilers.
Vile, right, who haven't seen it, but there's an issue in The Diplomat, which is a very political show. It's all about politics and what you do, who you lie to, how you finagle things, how you manipulate people, including the highest people of the government. And in season 2, which we've been watching, there's an issue of security, and it deals with Greenland. And all I thought was, has he been watching The Diplomat? Is this what we're doing? Is this so? That was my first thought with Dr. Vile. It's like, well, this is fantasy.
Trump watches a lot of television.
He does,
and it's always possible that he's. I mean, I honestly don't know of any politician since Truman who, and that was right after World War II in the circumstances you mentioned, where. If we had the money and Denmark didn't, they might profit from having the money and we might profit from we already had a base there.
Right.
So it would make some sense. But, one of the beauties of World War II was our claim that we did it with no territorial intentions.
Correct.
We didn't get any colonies.
Right.
And we, as we helped rebuild Western Europe through the Marshall Plan.
Right. Establish Israel.
We brought government back to Japan, put Douglas MacArthur in charge, and apparently did a very good job as a governor. Even in the Philippines, in an earlier time, we had promised them originally that we would give them their freedom. World War II intervened, but at the end of that war, in due time, we did turn it back up. We turned it over to the people.
Right.
So it would really be something of us, we waited, 75 years later, but that's what it make it look like that was our intention all along.
Exactly. And with World War II, like you're talking about the power grab and the land grab, there's a huge issue. If, there are a lot of different shows on Netflix, Amazon, et cetera, of, the intent of the Soviet Union at the time. And the idea was ultimately when they started winning, they're like, well, we'll go get the territory. And what we do know is they did capture part of Berlin. I mean, they kept and controlled East Berlin for decades.
East Germany.
Yes, I'm sorry. Well, East
correct. Germany, and then they shared Berlin.
Correct. So East Germany and Berlin, part of Berlin. So there was a territory grab there. That was part of their war, and we didn't look favorably on it. And we were, in favor of, the United States was in favor of West Germany and the democratic powers versus the communism that the Soviet Union was still doing. So I don't know if the justification is we're a democracy and they're not. I don't know, but it certainly doesn't feel good, and I'm very concerned about the legal implications.
And let's put in since I dissed him so badly, let's put in one good word here for Woodrow Wilson.
Your favorite person.
He did support the idea of each nation should determine its own fate. Mm-hmm. He was fighting with other colonial powers, but we were not, at least in that war, fighting for territorial gains.
Sure. Okay, so with this, let's go to with this very stressful segment, at least for me. Let's go to some books, Dr. Vile. I know. Let's do some more exciting, non-political. Well, maybe they are political books. I can't say that yet.
Let me tell you. Now, I want to tell you about this book.
Please.
Stuart Banner, The Most Powerful Court in the World.
Nice.
By Oxford University Press. It's by the Norman Abrams Distinguished Professor of Law at UCLA. It is a magnificent book. And as you know, I studied under Henry Abraham, who has
Yes.
a wonderful book on the judicial process. He has another book on the appointments of Supreme Court justices. This is as good a book as I have ever read on the Supreme Court, and I've read dozens of them. It's interesting that one of the comments on the back is by Sandy Levinson, who's a friend and a professor at University of Texas Law School. And it's very similar to my reaction. He says, written one of the best one-volume histories of the court now available. I've been teaching about the Supreme Court for half a century, and I'm embarrassed to admit how much I learned while reading Banner. Wow. And I felt the same way. This is really trivial, but I did not know that for 150 years, Supreme Court justices each were assigned a messenger. And that messenger would take, when part of it is what he does, he blends so many different things together. He talks about the physical, where the court was physically. He talks about where their offices were, how many clerks they had. He deals with each justice. And one of the things that's unique about it, it's a great history of the court, and he bucks the tradition, which I have followed often, which is we go to the martial court and then the tawny court. He didn't do it that way because he realizes that the Chief Justice was not always the most important person.
Right.
And so he breaks it down into, there's a rough chronology here, but it doesn't go by who the Chief Justice was necessarily. And anyway, what's fascinating is he tells about how at one point he talks about the parties that they used to have, Christmas or something. So all the messengers were African American.
Oh, interesting.
And often they would act almost like as household servants as well as, and then all the secretaries were
white women,
white females,
women,
and all the clerks,
males, white males.
And so, and they would have little conflicts over when we have a party together, do we invite the messengers? And then, then when you start getting female and African American clerks, what's their role here? And just little things like that. So it's a brilliant book. And then I want to tell you about two others that I can't remember. Now, I know you're reading one of these, right?
Yes, I bought that. I am reading it, and I cannot read it before bedtime because it stresses me out.
Have we talked about it on the show? I can't remember.
Only briefly we mentioned it.
Well, it's sort of
Say the title out loud for those of us who are listening.
Warning about basically what we would call white Christian nationalism.
Okay, and Dr. Vile, I'm going to stop you real quick. Say the title and the author for those listening on audio.
The Violent Take It by Force, Matthew D. Taylor.
Okay.
And his subtitle, The Christian Movement That is Threatening Our Democracy. And he basically is saying we have to be careful. Christians consider themselves patriots, just as many non-Christians do. But, the objectives of the nation are not always co-equal with those of God. And anyway, so he's very concerned about that. And then, so I've read a new one, which is equally challenging. It's has a nice little cover, Baptized in America.
Oh, that is pretty.
And it's by two different people, Brian Kaler and Bo Underwood. They're both pastors. One is a Baptist pastor, and the other, I believe, is Disciples of Christ. And they run something which I'm not previously familiar with. It's like Word and Way, which I'm taking it as some kind of website that looks like they post articles. But what he argues, and it's consistent with what I know from the book that I have done on the Bible and American political thought, that the idea of identifying the United States with Christianity is not a new development that we can blame on evangelicals or charismatics or some new group. It goes all the way back, to the City of the Hill speech that John, or writing that John Winthrop did, that we were going to be a special providential nation and
shining
God's
like
favor
a city
was
on
going
a hill.
to be upon us. And, in some ways, that's sort of a cool, it's sort of cool to think we're going to create an example of liberty that'll be a beacon to all. But if that becomes God is on our side and against everybody else, it can become very toxic. And what they don't do it say it quite as strictly as I, but they point out, especially during the Cold War, particularly during the Eisenhower years. During the Eisenhower years, we added under God to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Right.
We made In God We Trust, the national motto.
And so people know approximately what years is Eisenhower, because this is
53 to 61.
1953. So this is not 1700s, 1800s.
Yeah, 1951. I'm sorry. Yeah, 51 to 19. Okay, I'm sorry. 1953. He wins the election in 1952. He starts in 1953, and then he's followed by John Kennedy in 1961. But also, this is when the National Prayer Breakfast is started during this time period. And there was, and it had, you can understand why we were fighting communism,
right?
Which is explicitly an atheist creed. So you want to rally people around, the sacrifices that are necessary in Korea and Vietnam and all over the world. Well, we're fighting godless communism,
right?
We're in the white hats and they're wearing the black hats. God approves of what we're doing. We're the Israelites. They're the Amorites or the
Canaanites. Yeah.
Yeah, Canaanites. And it's sort of sobering to try to and I've long noticed this. I don't know how many people in their churches have the U.S. flag and the Christian flag on either side of the podium.
At least in Southern churches, it's very common.
It is, and actually, the church where I preach right now we have a flag outside the church, which I think is a little bit less. But one of the things he notes, and I have an encyclopedia on the U.S. flag, so I know a bit about this. But the flag, it's not by law, but the regulations governing the flags say that the U.S. flag is always supposed to be in the superior position. Wow. So if you have a U.S. flag and a Christian flag, the place of honor is supposed to go to the American flag. Well, what is that in biblical terms? That's idolatry.
Right.
That's putting something ahead of, something more fundamental than what you're preaching.
Well, and even so in Judaic
it's a sobering book.
Right. All right, so that's where we stand. We are gonna next topics, not in this session. We've already talked enough in this one, but coming up, we are going to be addressing. We didn't get to it January 6th and the certification. We're gonna have to pick that up next time. Some pardon issues, and Chelsea, you've got something there on the tip of your tongue.
Do I?
Oh, you seemed to, but maybe not.
No, I don't.
One thing, people need to watch the inauguration.
Absolutely.
I have a book on inaugurations and inaugural addresses.
Speeches.
And it will be very fascinating. People should go back and look at Trump's last inaugural address. It's sometimes called carnage. There's another word that goes with it. American
carnage, isn't it?
Basically, he says, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. We're going to clean it all up. And I can't quote exactly what George Bush said, but George Bush said, this is some crazy blank.
I see.
That was his reaction to the speech. And it'll be interesting to see if we have a little bit more positive tone this time.
I don't think we will. Nothing in his campaign was positive.
That just yesterday, or maybe it was today, Trump is blaming the fires in Los Angeles on the governor of California. And it's like, Biden, if there's one thing that Biden was really good at, and maybe because he had lost a son and lost a wife and a daughter, he was a good consoler in chief.
Right.
And somehow, I don't think it's going to help the people in California a lot to blame, you chose the wrong governor, and that's why you ran out of water. That's why you had the 80 mile an hour winds.
It's a natural disaster. That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah.
we will see.
Similar to, was it Pat Robertson, who was saying he blamed one of the, was it 9/11 on
Well, I think Jerry
non-Christianity?
Falwell actually,
Falwell.
right immediately afterward, right, sort of saw it as punishment on America and whatever. And it's like,
For godlessness.
if you're
and sin.
if you're a prophet, and God's giving you your prophet in ancient, but we forget the prophets in ancient Israel were often sawn in half and stuck in cisterns and
Exactly.
executed for their prophecies.
Yeah, it was
it's
not a good
dangerous
duty.
business.
All right. On that great note, everybody have a great happy hour.
Halloween glass here, is that?
Yeah, let's bring us back to that. Chelsea and I are going back to wine,
Okay,
though not in excess.
Remember not to drink too much. Go back to our original warning here.
Absolutely. No, the funny thing is, this is really about the only alcohol I drink every week is the one glass for the weekly wine. But
Exactly.
and Chelsea is not drinking a whole box; she is drinking a glass.
No, yeah, do clarify that. No, that's one glass.
Make sure I say that out loud. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found it interesting, insightful, educational, and maybe exciting and, I don't know, laughable at times. I don't know. Click like, subscribe, drop us a comment. We would love to hear from you. Again, please make it nice. We don't care if you disagree with us. We don't mind those extra comments, but no, degrading statements, name calling, cursing, we prefer not to have in there. In any case, Happy New Year, everybody. We will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.